The purpose of inaugurals is partly about talking about the new professor's area of expertise, but it's also about showcasing some of the research that is going on here at Keele as part of our commitment to high quality research as a leading research-based university. Sue Reid, as many of you will know, is Professor of Learning Disability Nursing in the School of Nursing and Midwifery here at Keele, and she's worked in the area of learning disability since 1976. She started out as a learning disability nurse and moved into education in 1986. Her research interests include loss, death, dying and bereavement, specifically, although not exclusively, with people with a learning disability. Sue is primarily interested in applied research that has a demonstrable impact on practice, and she has also developed, in conjunction with people with learning disabilities, with parents, with clinicians and other professionals, a range of resources around loss, bereavement and end-of-life care. Sue was born in Stoke-on-Trent, and although she's travelled extensively with her research and teaching, she's never lived more than 7 miles from where she was born. That's quite an achievement, I think. The presentation tonight is delivered in a slightly different format than we might be used to, since Sue has a very varied audience and she wanted as many people as possible to be able to appreciate her work. And she's delighted that several people with a learning disability who she's worked with over the years are able to join her here tonight, some with their families. And together with representatives from a range of charities such as Reach at Assist, Stoke, the Donna Louise Children's Hospice Trust in Trentham, Gingerbread in Longton, the Dover Service in Hanley and the Douglas Macmillan Hospice in Blurton. Her PhD students are also here and clinicians from the local hospital, to name just a few of those who've joined us. In this inaugural lecture, Sue wants to catalogue the challenges when supporting people with learning disabilities with disenfranchised grief and death. Against the UK backcloth, she will critically explore the concept, nature and meaning of support associated with loss and death in order to show the complexity when supporting individuals who have cognitive impairments. Using her research experiences of travelling alongside people with a learning disability through their personal journeys of loss, she will demonstrate that marginalised groups can indeed teach us so much about death and dying. But they often lack the vehicles and routes to help them share these experiences and this knowledge with others. Sharing her research journey with us tonight, the underlying theme will be how people with a learning disability can teach professionals about their grief and the lessons that we as researchers and academics need to learn. So, can I therefore formally welcome Sue Reid, Professor of Learning Disability Nursing, and invite her to present her inaugural lecture, Living in the Shadow of Grief, Lessons from People with a Learning Disability. Sue.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. And thank you everyone for braving the snowy weather conditions and managing to get here this evening. I never in my wildest dreams imagined I would be standing here in front of you guys on this platform. I guess we all have to be careful about what we wish for. And despite the nerves, I'm going to try and enjoy the presentation, and I really hope that you do too.
And we found out that he passed away.
I went to a proper church for a proper burial that my nan had. I went through my nan's death.
It's easy to talk about your own death. It's harder to talk about other people.
I'd like to know so I could plan things. Once you are dead, you are dead. That's life.
So I wanted to showcase tonight the important contributions that people with learning disability have made to research, particularly around sensitive topics such as death, dying and bereavement. So initially it's about identifying and cataloguing the challenges when supporting people with disenfranchised grief, to critically explore the concept, nature and meaning of support associated with loss and death, and to weave my research throughout this journey to demonstrate that people with learning disability can teach us so much and have so much to tell us if only we were able to listen. So I am a learning disability nurse. I'm proud to be a learning disability nurse. As the Vice-Chancellor said, I moved into education in 1986. And since 1990, I've been particularly interested in loss, death, dying and end-of-life care and bereavement. So tonight, not only research will be woven throughout the presentation, but also enterprise activities too. We've been very involved in working with people to develop resources to support people with learning disabilities. So I thought, because the audience is very varied, we need to start with the history reading, the backcloth against which I joined learning disability nursing all those years ago. So just 100 years ago, the Mental Deficiency Act catalogued or described people with a learning disability as being feeble-minded or moral defectives. I guess terms that really didn't enhance and help people at that time. And Santen Hall was opened as a local colony or institution. So in line with the 1913 Mental Deficiency Act, they developed services that were based around colonies or institutions. So institutions are what Irving Goffman described as total institutions, where people used to eat, play, sleep and live. They didn't need to leave the institution unless they had severe medical ill health. So, for example, at Starlington, we even had our own medical ward where people with illnesses were treated, and we even had our own doctors, medics, GPs, etc. So neighbourhood farms were the only people who actually connected with the community of people with learning disability. So the word colonies, I mean, it's an horrendous term, but in those days, that's what it actually was. It was a colony in the middle of nowhere, socially isolated and secluded, and it's predominantly to protect the public from people who were deemed to be not able to communicate and to integrate into community care and community living. So I guess Stanton Hospital, some people here will remember the institution way back then. It did have some good points as well as bad points. So some of the bad points, if you can imagine this institution in the middle of nowhere, in winter you had half the lane that was cleared of snow, but the other half wasn't. So if you lived up the top, you were fine, but if you lived at the bottom, you couldn't get home. So Stoke Council very rarely cleared the lane. You had free transport to and from work. And I don't know if I dare to say this, but you had free parking. And a selection of car parking spaces. What bliss, yeah? But apart from all the benefits to the staff working there, it was an horrendous environment to work in for many people with disability. And initially, I really was not a good advert for education. So I went to work at Starlington in the summer of 1976, and it was a summer break from sixth form college. And I never went back to sixth form college. How terrible is that? So I found my niche, and I stayed there and spent my early nursing years there at Starlington, and my first experiences of education, where I learnt so much about how to work with people. So the 1959 Mental Health Act redefined learning disability into mild, moderate and severe subnormality, all derogatory terms that did little to enrich the lives of people born with a learning disability. And in keeping with developments as time progressed, at Starlington we had a couple of houses. They were called Hilltop and Hillside. And initially they were doctors' houses, so we had wonderful environments for the medics. And then it was decided that really these would be wonderful halfway houses for people. So people with learning disability, they moved into these environments, and there they lived with support from staff until it was deemed appropriate that they move on to houses in the community. So this is our first taste, I guess, of community care or planned community care, paving the way for contemporary community care practices. On reflection, it feels as if we're talking dispassionately about people with learning disability. It feels like we did things to people. And I guess on reflection, largely that's what we did all those years ago. I guess now what we're talking about is that people with learning disability are more in control of what happens to them and should have a voice and a say in things that happen around them, one would hope. So defining learning disability, the UK definition of disability, according to the Department of Health, is people who have a reduced ability to understand new or complex information, to learn new skills, with a reduced ability to cope independently, which started before adulthood. I guess for me, what we need to remember is that everybody is unique, everybody is totally different, with different characteristics, preferences, personalities. So they're as different as everybody in this room. Yeah. The problem that we have is when we club people together, that the terms that we create for this become unhelpful in many respects. And I guess people with learning disabilities are more likely to function on a developmental level that is inconsistent with their chronological age. So quite often we see people who may be in their 30s and 40s, who maybe don't act as if they're in their 30s and 40s. But then I have colleagues who may be in their 30s and 40s, who often don't act as if they're in their 30s and 40s. And people with learning disability, unfortunately, they carry a history of marginalisation, devaluation and stigma. And what this means generally is that people are treated differently because they have a label of having a learning disability. Okay. It's estimated that we have about 2% of the population who actually have a learning disability in the UK. And I think what's important to me, and if you go away with nothing this evening apart from this comment, is that people with a learning disability have more similarities to us than differences from us. So if you were to make a list about all the things that you like and do and all the things that your body does, and do the same for a person with a learning disability, then generally there'd be more similarities across those lists than there would differences. But in my experience, when it comes to healthcare in particular, we get hung up on the differences. And it's the differences that cause all the challenges and all the barriers, particularly around healthcare. And I think there are three particular key times across the lifespan where the similarities are most prominent. So one is at birth. All children, all babies are virtually the same in many respects. They're all crying, pooing, demanding attention, comfort, unless they have an obvious physical health need. So babies are babies. So in this picture you will see a picture of my son, sorry Chris, but I did ask permission, who has cerebral palsy. You also see a picture of my niece, who's now 7, who has no disability at all. And then you also see a picture of the daughter of a very dear friend of mine, who happens to be here tonight, whose daughter had Rett syndrome. So 3 pictures, 3 innocent children, no evidence of disability or stigma associated with these children. The other time when similarities outweigh the differences, I guess, is as old age approaches. And people tell me that as I become much older, that I should become much more tolerant. That's really not working for me because time is running out. I've got so much to do and so little time to do it. And I seem to be getting more intolerant. But seriously, as old age approaches, things start to malfunction, not work properly, maybe things fall off and don't do things that they should be doing. And the issues are the same issues, whether you have a learning disability or not. So on the screen at the moment, top left, are photographs of my parents, both who died of cancer many years ago. And I wonder what they would have made of tonight. Bottom right is a woman with a learning disability who died of cancer. And she died one of the most dignified deaths I've ever seen in a home. She died with her hair done, she had her nails varnished, and she had her 2 cats on the bed. So she died a peaceful death, and she died how she would have wanted to have died at home. And then the final time when the similarities largely outweigh the differences is as death approaches. And holistic, palliative and end-of-life care becomes crucial regardless of age, culture, creed, disability. In my experience, most people are not afraid of death. They're afraid of the dying bit. They're afraid of the bit at the end where they lose control of what's happening around them. When they have no control over their pain, maybe. When they hand over their bodies to carers who can help them, maybe, but not sometimes help them with the pain relief that they really need. Sometimes people with learning disability die without knowing that they're dying. They die without knowing that they are seriously ill. Sometimes we're too afraid to tell them. Sometimes we want to shield them or protect them from the true impact of what's happening around them and the raw reality of death. Sometimes we just want to stop them from hurting. And that's not unusual. But I wonder what people with learning disability think and what they say about that. And ultimately, we can never shield people from loss completely. So loss isn't just about death. There are many other issues in life that evoke loss responses. And movement, change, development, transition, losses, grief, nothing is ever static. They ripple in and out of our lives, just like the tides. So loss is a thread that permeates throughout all our lives. This is a picture of Terrigal Beach. Terrigal is a place in New South Wales, and close colleagues will know that whenever I travel, things happen to me that shouldn't happen. So when I went to Australia a few years back, I got stuck in Australia for about 3.5 weeks. And the sad thing was, it was a volcanic ash issue. The sad thing was I was stuck 5 minutes from this beach with my laptop, and I couldn't get home. How terrible was that? And if it wasn't for the tenacity of my husband, thank you, Robin, I think I'd still be there, because they weren't, Singapore Airlines were not committed to bringing people back. So some of the pictures that you will see throughout this presentation will be about the travels, and most of them will be about some of the work that we produce as part of the collaborative efforts that we've been involved with. So loss can be described, we know it permeates throughout all our lives, and it can be described as a sense of being deprived or being without, and as such can be expected or unexpected. So the students amongst us, if you don't revise for your exams, you can expect to fail, and it won't be a surprise. But if you do revise and you still fail, then it's an unlawful shock, really. We should have passed. And fairly recently, Linda Machin, who's in the audience tonight, a close friend of mine, identified different types of loss, such as developmental loss, loss that happens to us all over time, circumstantial loss, loss that happens that we really don't welcome. So that's the untimely loss, serious ill health, death, bereavement. And then we have the invisible grief. So I think Linda's picked up on the theme of disenfranchised grief, where sometimes some people have grief that is invisible or seemingly not there because we can't see it and we don't allow people to do the things that they really need to do at a time of grief. For the majority of people, loss is dealt with within their immediate social context, with help and support from friends, family and close colleagues around them. Thank goodness, because the voluntary agencies would not be able to cope with the volume of people who needed additional support if everybody needed specialist help from bereavement counsellors or psychotherapy. So some people may be described as having complicated or prolonged grief, where they struggle to, often unsuccessfully, re-establish their lives without the dead person. For a small percentage of people, there is the need for more specific professional help and support in the form of psychological support from counsellors or psychotherapists. And for some groups of people, such help may be difficult to access, and grief work can be left unsupported and ultimately unresolved for many people in our communities. And such groups involve people with a learning disability. The dead and dying have much in common with people with a learning disability in terms of our social responses to them. The response that has been based upon exclusion and broken bonds, how we steer away from death and secret it away, is often akin to how we've treated people with learning disability way back in the institutions many years ago. And one of our major challenges is the acceptance of death as a natural part of life, by ourselves, by our patients, by our families, and by our culture. And it seems to me that just because we can treat, shouldn't be that we have to treat. And for some people, natural death seems to be a difficult thing to achieve these days, because we feel that we have to intervene and we have to do things. And the other issue is about death in a public or a private space. So is death hidden away and we don't see it, or are we exposed to it on a daily basis so that we talk about it and be exposed to the rituals surrounding death? Death of any individual can only count if the individual counted in life. And I remember as a bereavement counsellor supporting non-disabled bereaved people, many people came to me with boxes of condolence cards. They wanted to tell me the story of how many people turned up to the funeral. And it seemed that, often these become the measures of the man. He was important because 78 people came to the funeral. I've attended funerals of people with learning disabilities, and they've been attended with as few as a dozen people, most of whom have been people with learning disability. And we've had some very sensitive vicars who've, the only thing that they could do to get people actively involved in the funeral is to start clapping, to celebrate the life of a person who's now gone and now died. So at least then all the people involved in that ritual at the cemetery or the crematorium can be involved in remembering that person. Such sheltered lives, such hidden deaths and such hidden dreams, I guess, for people with disability. And the contributions that people with learning disability make can be huge if only we talk to people, if only we recognise them, and if only we bother to try and communicate in a way that is effective with people with disability. So this presentation largely is about, so I've lost my mouse now, but it's coming back, going. Sorry, it's coming back. Yeah, got it. Is largely about how people with learning disability can contribute to the work that we're doing. Death never occurs in a vacuum. It always occurs in a social context. So where you live, the support you get, is often indicative of how you grieve and how you mourn your people. So, you know, the context that people live in and the context that people are supported in are really important to people with learning disabilities. So if the people caring for people with learning disability in a professional care home, for example, or a nursing home, if they don't understand and appreciate the sensitivities of death and the importance of ritual, then many people with learning disability will not get to go to the funeral, will not get to go to the chapel of rest to say goodbye to their loved ones, because the gatekeepers will not let them do the things that we really need to be doing at this time in their lives. And I've come to realise that death can have many faces. So I'm not going to show you pictures of people, but this is a picture of the nave of St John's here, a co-cathedral in Malta, and my family, wherever I travel, I take photographs of cemeteries and memorials, and it's a standing joke on all our holidays. The benchmark of a good holiday is whether we've managed to find a good cemetery. So I'm sorry, Nigel, sorry, Karen, but we always go to find the best cemeteries around, and we've got so many to choose from in this wonderful world of ours. So some of these pictures are introduced in the slides today. So this I thought was really apt. It's a cathedral, co-cathedral in Malta, and of the there's 370 memorial stones there. Each one is a reflection of the person buried beneath it. So all the multifaceted faces of death encompassed in one building. So while we say that death is perceived as the ultimate loss and the only certainty within life itself, I believe that death has many faces. And one of the faces is that death can be a regular companion. So talk to people with a life-limiting condition and with prospect of untimely death for many months or even years. And the prospect of that death becomes a companion. Death is with them for many years or months. The picture on the screen is the Lepers Cemetery in Robben Island. I had the privilege of going to Robben Island a few years ago with colleagues at the university. And this Robben Island was many things apart from a prison. It was also a leper colony. And the people were buried on the place where they died. And it's surrounded by a metal fence. I did toy with the idea of putting the alternative view, because as you stood in the leper cemetery and looked opposite, you had the most fantastic view of the ocean and of Tabletop Mountain. So the two very rich comparisons, I guess. So death is a regular companion. Death can be sudden and unexpected. It can be a visitor when we're not expecting it. Arrives without warning or time to prepare, and it is often perceived as untimely and out of order. Death can be a welcome friend after times of excruciating pain, and the expectation of release is only through death when there's no other outcome for people with life-limiting disease. And death can also be a stranger, when, for example, death and loss are shrouded in secrecy, and individuals are not allowed to know about death and loss until absolutely necessary. For example, when the person has a learning disability, or the dying person has a learning disability.
Mum told me cats have 9 lives. I wish my mum had 9 lives. I'm missing now. Nobody seemed to speak about her. It's like it's a big dark secret.
If we understand the different ways that people react to loss, we understand something about what it means to be human. Something about the way we experience life and death, love and meaning, and sadness and joy. George Bonanno's book is a wonderful take on life, The Other Side of Sadness, and is well worth the read. So research tells us that people with learning disability do experience grief. We are all pages in the same book of life and death, yet some pages have more words and meanings than others. The impact of grief is varied and often complex, particularly if you have a learning disability, and can be multiple and profound. Response to bereavement by adults is similar in type, though not an expression, to that of the general population. One of the first people with a learning disability I ever visited as a bereavement counsellor was a young man named David. David had a learning disability and his nana had died a few months previously, and he wouldn't leave the house. So I was asked to go and visit this chap. And when I arrived, his mother said, I won't put the kettle on because you won't stay long enough, because David won't talk to you. So I stayed for about 40 minutes and I never got my cup of tea. And eventually he told me a story. And his story was very simple, as often life is. He told me that how, when Nan was alive, he used to get up in the morning. He'd get washed, dressed, have his breakfast, go around his nan's, and then his nan would give him money and he'd go around the shop and buy his chocolate and sweets. He'd come back to his nan's house and he'd sit and watch the matinee on the telly. That was life for David. So then I'm asking, well, what's life like now for you? Now that Nan isn't here, how is life different? So he thought for a while, and then David said, I get up in the morning, I go to the bathroom, get washed, dressed, have my breakfast, my mum gives me money. I go down the shop, go buy the chocolate and sweets, I come back and I watch the telly. So I'm saying, well, what's different without Nan? And he just said, the chocolate doesn't taste sweet anymore. So such profound language, so simplistic, and yet, you know, I think we call it, you know, bereaved people often speak through the heart before they speak through the head. And David definitely, he spoke through his heart. This is what his loss of his nan meant for him, was that even though he has all the usual things in life, something is missing, the magic ingredient. And his magic ingredient was chocolate. And I think for many people who go to Weight Watchers, if we could make that magic ingredient go away, then that would be fantastic.
If I was in heaven with my mum, there would be little town with cafes in which you don't need to pay money and they will be free.
People with learning disability are often excluded from visiting dying relatives. And it seems that the more complex the needs, the more unlikely this involvement becomes. I guess it's a factorial effect. So if a person with a learning disability is referred to a hospice maybe, then the chances of being actively involved in their care and treatment will be slightly reduced. If they have a learning disability and communication impairments, then they are less likely to be actively involved in the dying process. If they have a learning disability, communication impairments, and they have challenging behaviours, then they're less likely. So the more labels they have ascribed to them, the less likelihood they have of being actively involved in difficult and sensitive processes. So the more complex the needs, the less likelihood of being actively involved. This picture is the oldest cemetery in Baltimore, USA. So my first encounters around research into bereavement, death and dying and people with learning disability was the PhD. I completed the PhD in 2004 and I called it Journeys Without Maps. And I called it Journeys Without Maps because it was a participatory action research project and there was no other service that had been replicated, so I couldn't copy anything, I couldn't borrow anything. The whole idea was to work with a generic voluntary counselling organisation and to look what the gaps were and then address the changes within that organisation to see how we could cope and support people with learning disabilities. So it was a very cyclical process of working alongside counsellors, researchers, people with learning disability. It was a mixed methods approach and it was a very unique service and it resulted in the first textbook on learning disability and bereavement support at the time, so 2007. Not bad. 2004, the actual PhD was completed, and 2007, the book. What I didn't say was that the appendix to the PhD was the actual manual. So the manual was converted into the book a couple of years later. So I used several methods, 5 different research methods, quantitative and qualitative. But the parts I remember most from this work were the voices, the words, the experiences, the stories of the bereaved people I talked to. And years later, their stories still resonate with me and still stay around me. And one of the stories was called Picking Up the Threads. So Joan, the story of Joan was that she lived with a sister. She had a learning disability, lived with a sister, and her sister was taken critically ill. She had a heart attack at home, and she was rushed off in the blue lights, ambulance, etc., and she died en route to the hospital. But Joan had a brother, and the brother didn't really know how to care for Joan throughout this crisis. So, as is often the case, Joan was rushed into respite care, and because the brother really couldn't cope with supporting Joan at this difficult time, she wasn't told about the death of her sister for 3-4 weeks later. So she never got to go to the funeral, she never got to say goodbye to her sister, and when she did find out, she was so angry and so cross and so guilty that she'd never got to do the things she really wanted to do. So I spent a lot of time with this lady, and one day noticed that there were big bags of sewing, big black bin liners of stuff that she bought from home. And I asked her what all the baggage was and what was in the black bags. And she said she used to sew with her sister. They used to do tapestries and pictures and stuff together. So I said, I can't sew. I can't do cross-stitch. Would you perhaps be able to teach me how to do cross-stitch? So eventually we took the sewing out of the bag. We started to stitch. And along with all the threads and the stitching came the story of her sadness and her grief. And we stitched the tears into the fabric. And it was one of the hardest things we've ever done. Yeah. And every time we came, we got the sewing out, and she talked, and she talked, and she talked about everything that had happened to her. My biggest challenge was convincing my supervisor that sewing was a counselling skill. And I guess we call it activities or creativity. But I never got told off for using it. But I didn't use it again. I mean, it was just very much client-centred work. So my first encounters, I guess, the PhD research PhD research is a passport. It's a training, and it's your passport. What you do with it is up to you. Then you can either sit back and do nothing, which we would not support you doing, or you do something with it. You travel on your journeys of self-discovery. And for me, it was about confidence. It was about daring to walk alongside co-researchers to explore sensitive research issues. And my research journey has highlighted for me the disenfranchising effects of people with a learning disability and the overwhelming sense of sadness that is often overlooked and ignored, that they carry with them for many years. So, big words, I'm sorry, but disenfranchised grief is a term. Again, we're back in Baltimore, the oldest cemetery. Disenfranchised grief is grief when a person cannot or is not allowed to mourn or do the things that they want to do following a death. It's not publicly mourned or publicly acknowledged or socially supported. And Ken Docker, if you ever get the chance to go and listen to Ken Docker speak, he is a fantastic orator. He is American, and I once went to a workshop in Ireland, and he did a workshop for a whole day, and all he used was 2 slides for the whole day. He's just living in stories constantly. And he identifies that groups for whom disenfranchised grief often occurs are prisoners, people with mental health issues, people with learning disability, children, older people, people with HIV and AIDS. And I would add to that perinatal loss of children, young babies, either before birth, during birth, or shortly afterwards. So he says what normally happens is that if we don't allow these people to grieve, for whatever reason, whether it's the situation they're in, maybe it's because the relationship isn't recognised. And I still hear carers who say, you know, well, he hasn't seen his mum for 8 years. Do we really need to tell him that his mum's died? Does he really need to know? Where the loss isn't recognised, so, you know, maybe carers moving on, transitional loss, they haven't died, but they're moving on, and they'll probably never see the people they've cared for ever again. The griever is not recognised, so I still hear sometimes where there's no sense, there's no feeling. I still hear people who say that because the people is profoundly disabled, does that mean he won't understand or appreciate the complexities of death and dying? And then he more recently added the ways that people grieve, so how we can support people and the circumstances surrounding the death that are very important. So what this means is that people are excluded from the death and dying process, and that people experience sudden rather than anticipatory death. And for the grief people amongst us, sudden death is the hardest death to accommodate for many different reasons, largely because it's often catastrophic death and unexpected, so we never got to say goodbye to our people. So all this work about the autonomy, the pending death, disenfranchised grief, This led me to a collaborative piece of research with a colleague and close friend at Glamorgan in Wales. So the piece of research that we conducted, we managed to get about £50,000 to conduct a piece of research where we actually ran focus groups in Stoke and in Wales. And we used, I don't think this has been used before, but we used progressive focus groups. So usually focus groups are a one-off event, but we use them progressively so that people could bring things back to the group. People could bring homework and pictures so they could learn too from the focus group. It wasn't just about taking things from people. It was about giving them an opportunity to learn. We made a film about the outcomes of the work, and all the vignettes that you see throughout the film are clips from that film that we did. Originally, we were going to do an audio tape, but for people who work in learning disability services, we know that learning disability people, we don't get much money. So when we do get money, we're very resourceful. So originally it was going to be an audio tape, but we had so much money left that we made a videotape. And we actually worked with the borderlines at the New Vic Theatre. So we had people with a learning disability to act out the vignettes, which is a fantastic way of disseminating knowledge that really is anonymous, because you'll never trace back who said what. And when I see the clips, I don't remember who said what. So I guess some of the things that were significant, well, we were struck by the number of losses that we gained and that we learned about. The normality of loss and grief. Doesn't matter whether you have a learning disability or not, loss is still important to people. The importance of pets. One chap told us how sad he was that because he had his dog died when he was about 14, he was now in his 40s, and since that time he'd never been allowed to have another pet because his mother didn't want to see him sad again because his dog had died. So losing all the opportunity to become sad, even though you've had years of friendship and companionship from your pets. We found that they were not afraid to contemplate their own death, and the support staff were very surprised at the extent to which death had touched their lives, especially around people that they knew well.
I never got to say goodnight to my granddad. I wanted my dad with his boots on.
Some of the significant findings of this research, this collaborative research, reaffirmed to us that people with learning disability react in a very similar way to our non-learning disability participants, whether it's working with groups of nurses, medics or physiotherapists. When talking about death and dying, if you put people in a comfortable room, get them chocolate biscuits, give them cups of coffee and help them to feel safe, they will talk about sensitive topics that are important to them. And this is the case for people with disability too. They need to feel safe. One thing that I'd never considered is that people with learning disability, they worry about people and they worry about forgetting people. And I wonder how many of us worry about forgetting people who've died. And maybe that's why we carry photographs in our wallets, because if we forget that picture momentarily, we can put the photograph back and the image is very quickly inserted back into our conscious thoughts. They also talked about sharing it. It was important to share the stuff around loss and dying. And they seemed to have less contact with the dying bit. We called it the hidden face of death, or the hidden face of dying. So the bereavement stuff, we seem to be having lots of experiences of people being involved in bereavement, but the dying bit was more of a hidden part of their lives. But they desperately wanted to be involved and wanted to be informed. So the outcome of this work, and at Kiel, we're always interested in outcomes if we can get any. I think what's interesting is the first article was a byproduct. It wasn't about the research. It was about how working with people with learning disabilities helped us to see how we could make meaning and how we could help people with a learning disability to have a voice. So Patsy Corcoran, my very close friend and colleague from Reid Just Assist, we wrote the article together. So this was about the process of doing the work. It wasn't about the research itself. And then we've had an article and a chapter. And then we have the DVD, the film, conversations about death and what it means. Really interestingly, going to the NRES Ethics Committee, the only thing they questioned about this research, and it was very sensitive, very difficult work to do, they didn't like the title that we called it. So the title originally was Dying to Talk About Our Good Deaths. And the Ethics Committee said no, conversations about death and what it means is far more acceptable. So of course we obliged. So I've told you about the film that we did. And I guess working alongside people with learning disability has done many things for me in terms of how we shape research, how we conduct research and how we access people to conduct research with. So we always use pictures with the help of Assist, who help us very, very often in our images. Incidentally, these are pictures from my PhD, so they're years old, but I still use them. It's about talking about case studies, talking about writing things down, but also ticking boxes on consent forms that are really important. But working alongside people with learning disability has also helped us to see how we shape our research strategies. So you've probably gathered by now, I really do enjoy qualitative research and focus groups for people with learning disability. And what we tend to do when working with people with disability is use flip charts, and we put drawings, we put questions, everything about the meeting is incorporated on the flip charts. And then we photograph these images, so the pictures you see are the photographs of the images. And I guess this serves lots of purposes. It's a way of member checking or credibility checking that what we've actually written is what the people in the group wanted us to write, because when it's fed back to them, does it sound the way that they really wanted us, or they tried to say it? It also adds credibility to the research because we're trying our best to engage with people with learning disability in very creative ways. And it also adds to another data set because it shows us not only the transcriptions, but we've also got the pictures as well to supplement what we did and what we found, etc. And Patsy's a really good illustrator, as you can see on the drawings. It's also helped in shaping research, and unfortunately, I don't think Richard's here tonight, and I don't think Sol Knight's here either. But I managed to get some postdoctoral funding to work with Dr. Richard Stevens in psychology, and Sol Knight, who's a student, a PhD student at Manchester, and Patsy Corcoran from Assist. And Richard and I initially met at a research speed dating event organised by the Research Institute, which was fantastic. And out of that meeting, we then realised that we got shared interests around people with disability, and also measurements of different types of bereavement stuff. So initially what we wanted was to develop a tool to assess the need for bereavement counselling support for people with learning disabilities. So we envisaged an electronic tool that would help us to use tick boxes to say, oh yes, he scored 19, send him to the Dove service, he needs bereavement counselling. So we worked with a very small group at Assist, people with learning disabilities. Many are here at the back tonight. And what they told us and what they eventually shaped us to looking at was that really what they needed was a tool to facilitate storytelling, a tool that would help people to share their stories about loss and death in a very constructive way. So we then purchased a web domain called PicTalk, and that means pictorial tools for talking. Dead clever, isn't it? And so we own that web domain now, so we can access, this is a screenshot of the actual tool itself, and we've now piloted this and trialled it in working with children around sensitive topics and in working with adults with learning disabilities. I could tell you a lot more, but we don't have time really. So my research has not just been about research, my research journey has also been about enterprise. And I love this quote from Kurt Lewin: research that produces nothing but books will not suffice. So it's about what we do with that research that's really important, particularly to people with learning disability. We can't wait 17 or 18 years to get things implemented into clinical practice. We need to look at ways that can help us to do things a little bit quicker. And I've been really fortunate. I've been involved with an incredibly talented group of people who've helped me to develop and shape and design a series of toolkits. Under the auspices of Toolkits for Better Health, we've had several toolkits now published. So I know this is breaking conformity really, but or normality, but on the floor down the bottom, on the base of the stage, there's a range of resources. If you want to have a medal at the end, please do. And there's also some freebies that I can give you if you're interested. But I'll tell you what those are at the end. So the three tools that we've been really involved in is the far right is the Health Access Toolkit. So this is where we got over £100,000 from the West Midlands to look at developing a toolkit, introducing it across the North Staffordshire UHNS hospitals and further afield across the West Midlands, and we did that over a period of about 3 years. And then the middle ones that you'll see they're on the floor down there, and these are communication cue cards that we've worked with Patsy and Assist in helping over the years to shape and develop that Assist own the copyright for. And then the nearest one is the most recent one, and this was a very sensitive toolkit, and this was about communication for children, young people and families where there is a learning disability at the end of life. So this was about very sensitive topics, and this was work that was done in accordance with Birmingham Children's Hospital and was funded by the Department of Health. So in all these projects around the toolkits, project groups were quickly established, and this is about working with the appropriate people at the appropriate times, people from health, education, etc., members of local advocacy groups, people with a learning disability, and parents were all involved in this work. And the adult toolkit actually won the West Midlands Health and Social Care Awards in 2010. If you look at the picture really closely, this is the group of people who went to receive the award on the night. And if you look closely, guess who isn't there? I was on a train coming from Bournemouth, having been teaching for 2 days, running workshops in Bournemouth. So I was on the phone and Sue Jackson was phoning me saying, I think we've won it. And then we were cut off and I'm like, oh, no. But it truly was a wonderful achievement and a lovely moment for everybody who was involved in that work. Good health is important for everybody. So the toolkits are going to be developed and we are continuing to evolve and do things around this. And I'll tell you what those are shortly. So, what has been my impact? What have I done with my journey and my research and enterprise? Well, I think I've networked well with a range of clinicians, researchers, nationally and internationally. I'm conjoint professor at the University of Newcastle in New South Wales. They don't have learning disability nursing in Australia, so they welcome such expertise. And believe me, they treat you like gods when you go over. They're fantastic. It's really worth a visit. I've helped to raise the profile of loss, death and bereavement, particularly in relation to people with learning disabilities. I've carried an active caseloads of clients since 1990. I still work with parents. I still work with people with learning disability. And I've remained grounded in the reality of clinical practice. And working with such people have enabled me to do that. I've helped a number of people with learning disability to have a voice and to speak out and to say things that otherwise may not have been said. And I've enabled some people with a learning disability to share their experiences through teaching, writing and research. And I've worked alongside parents and people with learning disability in so many different ways. Somebody once asked me, what is the best article I'd ever written? And I said, it wasn't the best article, but it was my favourite. And it was an article that I co-authored with a woman with learning disability named Claire. And it was around life story work, and it was in 2007. And she was so thrilled to have her photograph taken. And the money that she earned through the article paid for her to have her bedroom decorated. But she's thrilled to have left her footprint somewhere in the journals that we're involved in. I've also helped 2 parents to write articles about what it's like to support someone who is different within the family. And I'm really honoured that both parents are here tonight. So thank you so much for coming. What have I learned from working alongside people with disability? I've learned to be very humble. It sounds so twee to say it's been a privilege, but it's been an absolute privilege to work with the people who I'm able to work with. And not be afraid to ask for help. So if I speak to Roger and ask him what he thinks, I've got to be prepared for what he tells me, because he always tells me the truth. I have to remember that people with learning disability are largely the same as everyone else. And that people with learning disability have so much to teach us, and there is so much to learn. So what does the future hold? I guess in research terms, I'm a collaborator on a £98,000 grant with Glamorgan University, end-of-life care in care homes for people with learning disability across the UK. We're awaiting a decision, and the decision whether we've been shortlisted will come in March, and this is on a £380,000, Australian dollar, not pound, collaborative bid with the University of Sydney, with the Australian Research Centre. So we'll know if we've been shortlisted in March, and we'll know if we get the money in June. And that's about end-of-life care and toolkits. A recent research enterprise grant, from Unlimited and HEFKI allowed us to work with Reach and Voice, advocacy charity in Wrexham. And I think this is the first ever bereavement support leaflet for people with learning disabilities. And if you want to take a copy with you today, I bought a few on the floor if you'd like to take them. And this booklet's on the screen, and it's an interactive booklet. So it lets people to objectively think what people need. There's case vignettes in there, and work through what helped people. And then at the very end, there's a checklist and space to say, and if it ever happened to you, what would help you? So I think it's a very clever booklet. And that's been done with two of the charities that we've worked with. Thank you. Resources. We're already into the game of doing the second editions of the bereavement leaflets. So all the leaflets are on the stage at the bottom if you'd like to have a look. We've got palliative care and bereavement leaflets. And we're awaiting confirmation from the Let's See boards about whether we'll have money to update the adult toolkit, which we're very hopeful of. And the other thing we want to do is to develop a resource, a teaching pack, to teach all student nurses, regardless whether they're in the learning disability branch, about what it's like to have a learning disability and come into hospital. So we're awaiting a decision about whether we've got that money or not. And the bottom one, this book is very close to my heart, and it'll be out next year. And why it's close to my heart is that it spans research, it spans practice, and there's about 17 chapters, and it's got an international authorship, but it also has people with learning disability writing chapters in conjunction with support people. It's got parents writing chapters. It's got PhD students writing chapters. So it spans the whole continuum of experiences of working with disability, with loss. And how interesting that compassion's there. Big issue in nursing at the minute is, do we have care and compassion in nursing? Well, we certainly have it in our learning disability book. So in conclusion, you'll be pleased to know, death and dying are sensitive topics for everybody, regardless of whether we have a learning disability or not. But we need to remember that people with learning disabilities are part of us rather than being apart from us. They have more similarities than differences. Collaborative working is the key to effective support. So knowing what support's available, who to contact. It's also about remembering the contributions that people with learning disabilities can make in the work that we're doing and can help to shape the research that we're wanting to do. Working alongside people with learning disability as co-researchers has taught me so much about the process of research. And often there's this generalisability. If it works well with disability, maybe it'll work for people with dementia. Maybe it'll work with children. There's so many possibilities about generalisability or replicability.
I'm sitting here waiting for my taxi. Usually me and my mum is sitting here waiting for my taxi. She usually stops off at the flower shop. I always say, see you later, alligator. She says, in a while, crocodile. And I go the rest of the way off to college. Oh, there's a taxi. Come on, Mum.
When I reflect back about what has brought me to this podium here tonight, central to all my work has been people. Regardless of where my work takes me, whatever country it takes me, regardless of what research I'm involved in, people are of fundamental importance. As nurses, we're in the people business, and as an academic and researcher, I've remained firmly rooted in the people business. Working alongside people with learning disability, parents, colleagues, clinicians from a range of different health and social care fields, including adult and children's hospices, advocacy services, some of whom have managed to come tonight, has helped me to keep me grounded in the reality of practice issues, and helps me to connect. I've lost my mouse again. Connecting me to other people, helping me to connect people with other people so they can work together, and reminding me of what's important. I've been incredibly lucky throughout my career to have met and worked alongside so many different people who've had such a range of experiences and talent. I get to stand up here tonight to celebrate my craft with you this evening, but without the talent and passion of those around me, my craft would not have been half as good. You know who you are, too many to name personally. Thank you for your support and involvement over the years. Long may we continue to work alongside each other and continue to make a difference to the people that we care for. We started this presentation with the voices of people with learning disability, and I think it's only right and proper that we end this presentation with the voices of people with learning disability.
Your body turns into a skeleton, but you still have a soul, so you have to enjoy life as it comes.
I don't think I'm trying, but it helps if I talk about it.
When I die, I'm going to be with people I love.
Thank you for your attention. Thank you.